Greetings, you happily miserable accursed. I'm David Herle of the Regina Herleys. He's Scott Reid of the Prince Edward County Reids. And we're going to get right to it today because not only do we have a fantastic guest panelist this week, we also have a surprise cameo appearance from someone who's been taking our Curse of Politics name just so fucking literally, eh? First, our guest panelist is Sally Housser. Sally was with us on the Hurly-Burly just over a year ago as part of an NDP election panel that we ran just ahead of the last federal. She's a former advisor to NDP leaders Jack Layton and Rachel Notley. She's now the Senior Manager, Public Affairs at Canadian Strategy Group, specializing in strategic comms and issues management, and she lives in Regina.
That's
Thumbs
right.
up.
So how strategic can she really be?
And Diane Terrian's joining the three of us for the first 15 minutes or so of the pod. Diane, as I'm sure a lot of our listeners know, is the mayor of Peterborough. She's been managing a hell of a lot of goddamn QA nonsense in her town lately, and we're going to start our conversation right there. We'll also cover Poilievre's recent messaging on the economy, inflation, and, well, breakfast foods. Assuming Danielle Smith wins the leadership of the UCP, how should the federal government react to her Alberta Sovereignty Act? Our cursed clipping this week is from the Regina Leader Post and Jeremy Symes about Scott Moe's $500 check to everybody in the province, and we'll bring the pod to a Pincentian finale with our Hey Yous. Scott, Sally, Diane, so happy to have you all here. This is going to be a ton of fun.
Absolutely.
It's an Eastern Ontario, Saskatchewan clash here. We're evenly balanced. We'll see on the basis of witty remarks which one of us wins out.
If we just team up, we can take over the country.
That's the way I look at it.
So, Mayor, you had an interesting week or so?
Yeah, it's been wild. I mean, we've been dealing with, this QAnon convoy stuff for a long time now, and we're not the only community, obviously, that's been prey to some of these scam artists, quite frankly. But the events of last Saturday were just like truly wild. And this, Queen of Canada person, like I didn't know too much about her prior to that weekend.
Now you sound like Poilievre.
Yeah. Oh, fuck no. Come on. But I was in the loop because I'm, on the police services board and I have a great relationship with the chief of police and inspectors over there. And so I was kind of monitoring it. And it was just like, oh my gosh, like again, we have to deal with this kind of nonsense. And it's so frustrating because not only is it, scary to watch this sort of slow descent into fascism, which again, people need to be calling out in the strongest possible terms, including using 4-letter F-bombs when required. But the fact that they came to our community with the explicit stated intent to cause harm and disruption and pull police resources and other frontline resources away from the people in our community that pay for them and actually need them. Domestic violence calls, mental health calls, all that kind of stuff. Our police were tied up for hours dealing with these fuckwads across the street. And that's infuriating, the level of entitlement that these people feel, and then the umbrage that they take when they get called out for their behavior.
What are they doing? What are they doing to create a disturbance and to require police resources? And what is their agenda? Are they asking for anything? What do they want?
So this latest one was a bit different than some of the normal convoy and anti-everything protesters that we've seen. This was more of the like QAnon, real wild conspiracy theory. Our leader's an alien and there is no government and we don't have to pay taxes, but now we're mad that our hydro is getting cut off, kind of just like delusional lunacy. So they came here because again, most of these folks were from out of town. There's a couple of people involved that are locals and known to police and known to us, but their stated intent of the day was to like go to the police station and place the police under citizens' arrest for their complicity.
It was incredible to watch. I'm placing you under arrest. Some like 6'3" cop. He's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Get your hands off my handcuffs.
Gathered in front of the police station and, had a bit of a party out there, and then tried to like bum rush the police station through the like two little doors that lead into it. And were unsuccessful. And so then there was a bit of a skirmish outside, and our police force and the officers that were on duty. And again, we had to call in off-duty officers. We had to call in resources from everywhere else, which took resources away from everywhere else in the city that needs them to deal with these assholes. And so there was a skirmish up front, and our police officers were so patient, gave these folks ample warning and opportunities to disperse, and they didn't. So a few of them ended up getting arrested. And of course, like, people are bewildered that this could possibly happen to them, that there's consequences for their actions, which is just the most like wild thing. So it was a really intense weekend. And again, our first responders and officers handled it with like the utmost professionalism and patience. I would not have exercised such restraint. And
can you imagine if you lived in an actual dictatorship and tried to do something like that?
Well, or if you were like a person of color or indigenous people, like they're.
The entitlement's insane.
It's insane, and like the police station is located. There's residential neighborhood all around it, basically. So these people are disrupting not just that, but the families that want to, traverse through the neighborhood on a nice Saturday afternoon. And these people just don't care about anybody but themselves, right? Like they're just me, I. And then they get mad when they're called out or when they get in trouble because they seem to have never been told no before in their entire lives.
Sally.
Yes.
You are the senior manager at Canadian Strategy.
I am indeed.
You are. Do you have any advice for the mayor of Peterborough as to how she ought to handle these kooks?
I think that the mayor is doing an excellent job, frankly. I might live in Regina, but I'm from Newfoundland originally. So, I'm certainly not shocked or taken aback I don't need smelling salts when I hear a curse word. But I think the mayor is absolutely right in that these things do have to be called out in a way that this is ridiculous. This is not something that should be happening in a functioning country. And the wildness of the conspiracy theories that keeps growing and growing and growing. And as it's emboldened, not just in Peterborough and across the country, it's something that simply cannot continue to happen. I think kind of holding the line, it seems that the mayor has got a great relationship with the police and the first responders in town, and I think continuing to have that support and dialogue with the people who have to deal with it. People say, well, why can't we just, dialogue and listen to these people and their concerns? And it's like, like the mayor said, it's one thing, people kind of protesting the mask mandates. It's another when, how are you dialoguing with somebody who, like you said, thinks that, the leadership is alien and we don't have to pay taxes and things like that. There's a point where dialogue has diminishing returns, frankly.
Yeah. You can't reason with unreasonable people is what I keep saying, And
that was Danielle Smith's platform you just outlined there. So. The leaders are aliens and we don't have to pay taxes.
One thing
Scott, do you think you can deal with it? Go ahead. Yeah, go right ahead.
I was just going to say to the mayor, it obviously struck such a chord, and I'm sure you've gotten all sorts of abusive bullshit and blowback from, the chorus of fuckwads. And by the way, I think the word fuckwad will actually never be the same again. I think you branded it. I think that it's yours now. I think you should get a nickel every time it's said by anyone in all of Canada.
Trademark, yeah.
So, by the way, it's top tier cursing. It's top tier cursing.
Use it all the time with these people, and because that's the thing too. I've gotten some, abusive messages or whatever, but the vast majority have been supportive.
Well, and that's where I wanted to go.
We're saying what everybody's thinking. You know?
Exactly. And that's where I wanted to go, is that I think it strikes such a chord. As we sort of sit here and we look back at what happened in Ottawa a few months back, and now we're watching this, this committee hearing in Ottawa about Emergencies Act invocation. And yes, there's a legal threshold and a statutory threshold that has to be demonstrated and all that. But it all sort of takes on this air of unreality where the onus seems to be on all of us to defend why we would tell the small of them to fuck off and get off the curb, right?
Then they're trying to undermine democracy. They're trying to, march us slowly towards brainwashing and fascism. No fucking way, not on my watch, right? And Canadians need to, I think by and large, as much as we have a reputation for being polite, we all know that we all love to curse. We need to meet them on their level. You cannot engage with them in a scholarly debate. It's not going to work.
I wanted to ask you about that.
Treat them with the respect that they've been treating your community, treating Ottawa, treating Windsor, treating Peterborough. I'm treating them 100 times more respectfully than they've been treating the city of Peterborough by telling them to fuck off.
So and I'm sure you've been asked this 100 times, because I know that you've gotten every media organization in the world calling you, but two things. One,
but she's on Curse of Politics.
She's on Curse of Politics. So fucking take that, fuckwads. But one, the decision, it's a deliberate decision when an elected politician, and there's a relief when you speak in just a plain spoken, cut the shit way, right? So I think that's what got such a response, and people, I think, have felt frustrated, and they're hearing and seeing that frustration expressed by you, and I think that's why it's so resonant. But one, nevertheless, the decision when you're in elected office to employ that phraseology, right, without apology and deliberately, and then second, so why, tell us about that decision. You decided, nope, actually, I'm going to, the cursor's going back. I'm actually going to curse with the cursor. And then secondly, would you have done it if you weren't reoffering? Was it that you felt a certain freedom?
If she was reoffering, you mean? Yeah.
If you were reoffering, pardon me.
I did, there was some, I went sort of semi-viral a couple of years ago when I put out a tweet to Bernier and Hillier telling them to stay TF home. And some people again were, but that was before I had made the decision. A part of the reason that I got elected was because I knocking on doors. If somebody's cursed, if somebody's like, oh, fuck yeah, that, and then I would say, oh, fuck yeah, too. I'm not reading off a playbook. I think that level of authenticity is part of what helped me get elected in the first place. So I think that if I was running again, I absolutely still would have employed the same language, because enough is enough. We've been dealing with this for too long. And sitting, idly by and permissively sort of letting this hatred take over. And it's just no, I'm tired of it. People are tired of it. Again, I think that's why it struck a chord. I think the other thing that, I've been trying to express is, I was elected when I was, 32 to the office of mayor and 28 originally as a councillor. And so people were like, what's all this, and I think so. Not only changing what we think politicians look like, because I'll go to events and people.
You don't look anything like Jeff Leal.
Well, people are like, we're waiting for the mayor, and I'm like, I'm already here, and they're like, no. But also changing how politicians talk, because some of the most vile things I've heard said from all levels of politicians have been said under a veil of decorum, racist, misogynistic, homophobic shit that is said, but it's not. They're not using cuss words, so people don't call it out in the same way. I've heard the most vile shit around the council horseshoe here. We hear it from that PP guy from, all the time, but he doesn't curse. And so it's also changing the way that we think politicians should talk, because a lot of the tone policing is very classist. A lot of it's very sexist. But I've had, folks reach out to me. I had a really nice message from a woman that I know saying, thank you so much. She's like, I never thought I could really achieve anything because I'm a foul mouth. People think I'm trailer trash. She's like, but I see you say these things, and I applied for a job I never thought I was qualified for, and I got it. So that kind of stuff, it's yes, we need to be changing the narrative around what politicians are supposed to look like and how we're supposed to talk.
So why aren't you running again?
Yeah, and can we get you to run somewhere else? Can we take you out of Peterborough? Can we make you the mayor of Canada? Will you do that for us? We'll help.
I'm looking forward to, surprisingly, because I did not expect this tweet to go viral, because I've been looking forward to some time out of the spotlight, which might not seem like what went down. I mean, there's several reasons why I'm not running again. And if you look at Peterborough specifically, the 3 progressive women on council, none of us are running again, which speaks a lot about the culture at City Hall and the culture around council. Peterborough is a very progressive city, but we also have a very angry old guard that is clinging to power. And so, that's part of it. I also it's been a lot through the pandemic, through, the housing and opioid crisis, and we get very limited support from our senior levels of government. And I also I've been on city council for 8 years, which is more than most people. And the last couple of years have been very challenging, and I need to take some time for my mental health and well-being, because life's too short to be miserable. Because YOLO, right? And I don't want to, I don't want to do it again if my heart's not 100% in it. Because I love this community, but I can give back to it in other ways. And I'm not ruling out running for a different level of politics.
Yeah, I know a political party that could use your talent. Give me a call if you're interested. Yeah.
But in the short term, I'm just taking some time away and doing some stuff that I want to do and enjoying the freedom,
Right. Well, I know that you have to run off now and run the city of Peterborough. So thank you for taking the time to join us this morning.
Yeah, happy to come back anytime.
Really appreciate it. And you're a star. So keep going. Yeah. Keep going.
Well, everybody tell the fuckwads to fuck off. If they're causing havoc in your community, I do not own this catchphrase, but I hope people use it because it's accurate.
Yeah.
All right. We will carry your mantle forth.
Thank you.
There we go. Thank you, Mayor. Nice to see you.
I appreciate it so much. Thanks all.
All right, Herle Burleyites. Last week, I promised to take you on a world tour for the next few weeks. Well, I call it a world tour. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, calls it international best practices of countries who are making evidence-based policy decisions around how they manage their spectrum, those invisible radio waves that make wireless connectivity possible. And importantly, what the results are for their innovation economies. So let's go to South Korea. We'll spend a couple of weeks there, which is good because I like the barbecue. South Korea is stomping Canada on accessing the benefits of 5G. Full stop. Here's why. They auctioned all their mid-band spectrum and their millimeter wave back in 2018. We only managed to auction half of our mid-band in 2021, with the remainder on the docket for 2023. Millimeter wave hasn't even come up yet. Maybe late 2023? Executive summary. South Korea is getting this stuff out faster and cheaper. What does it mean for network quality? 5G coverage of 98% of the population. Downloading at 3 times the speed of Canada's fastest wireless carrier. That's TELUS, by the way. So it's service quality, but it's also a competitive issue, eh? South Korea is way out in front of us in their innovation economy. Just a couple of examples. Their smart factory solutions now include 5G AI robot that can filter out defective products in less than 8 seconds. They're also piloting a 5G smart hospital that includes services like digital diagnostic pathology and remote surgeries, plus AI-enabled patient care and an OR autonomous robot. It all comes back to policy, Herle Burleyites, and how government decisions based on mounting evidence from around the world can have a dramatic impact on how we live, stay healthy, fight climate change, and economically prosper in this fourth industrial revolution. Daum Jadu. That's Korean for more next week, or at least it's my Korean for more next week. So that was fun.
That was great. I just, the kind of people every time a politician curses and, and the outrage and, oh my God, needing to take the vapors is so, I was thinking back to, Pierre Trudeau's fuddle duddle many moons ago. And he actually said that. He told a Newfoundland member of parliament to fuck off in the House, essentially. And my uncle Ray Guy was a political satirist. He said, having Pierre Trudeau say to a Newfoundlander a curse word is like being stung by a mosquito and having nothing to reply in kind but a bazooka.
Trudeau also gave the finger to people that were protesting him on the train and were shouting insults and shit at his kids, including Justin. And he gave him the finger through the train window. That actually only increased my respect for him at the time as well.
It generally works for politicians. Like, I think, she herself invoked, like, hey, if somebody talks a certain way, I'm gonna relax and speak back to them in the same vernacular if that's my comfort place. And and we all talk about authenticity. I mean, that's what people are responding to. It's just like that video of Beto going nuts on that gunner guy, right? And going, hey, motherfucker, you might think it's funny, but I don't, right? And I think people respond to that because they're like, thank God someone is channeling what I'm feeling. And so much of the dialogue gets dominated by these loud assholes. So when she goes, hey, fuck off, fuckwads, we all go, thank you for being my delegate.
Well, also when they're showing up with signs that say fuck Trudeau, or like with Nazi symbols, or, all sorts of vile stuff that is like out there for everyone to see, like, you've got to have an appropriate level of response.
And people going, how dare the cops crack down on these guys? Look at them abusing their powers. These people are like hitting cops and spitting on them. And it's like, I don't know how they don't just like take those big cop flashlights out and say, all right, motherfuckers, this fight is over. And they were show restraint, as she said.
When I was a kid and the Second World War was still within memory, it was just inconceivable to me that I would ever see a swastika in this country.
It's wild. Continues to be absolutely wild to me.
Right.
Well, one thing that was a curb against it, just quickly, David, on that point, I don't know about you, but my family was filled with veterans of the Second World War. So it was these guys, like, you just couldn't get down the street and have something to say about, the swastika, because it would be like, well, hang on a second, right? Like, we all went over there when we were 19 in order to stop that. So there will be no tolerance of that whatsoever. But, that generation has died. And now, people pick the symbol up as though it's a rebel yell. It's not a rebel yell. You're an asshole. You're an illiterate asshole. You're illiterate of history if you're going to champion that symbol.
Totally. All right, let's move on. Sally, I want to start with you.
Okay.
Pierre Poilievre had another video out yesterday. I don't know if you saw it.
I did.
You did. He was having breakfast with an imaginary Justin Trudeau and lecturing Trudeau about inflation. People seem to be noticing that Poilievre has dropped some of the more esoteric themes that he was campaigning on earlier and is focusing like a laser on the economy these days. Paul Wells wrote yesterday that he hears more about the economy from Poilievre than he does from Chrystia Freeland. Is this an evolution of the Poilievre campaign or just a short-term taking advantage of this moment?
I think it's absolutely an evolution. First of all, the breakfast with Justin reminded me of Clint Eastwood talking to the empty chair at the Republican convention a lot of times. But that being said, I've noticed, and there's been a couple of videos now. There was one he did the other day talking about, using the example of a single mother and having, if you work, you get clawed back. And I thought, like, geez, that's like messaging that could come from the NDP, and kind of why are we doing more of that? I think what it probably is that he feels confident enough now that the Conservative leadership race is pretty sewn up. And he can pivot from that kind of more World Economic Forum, that, the kind of more out there right-wing stuff that you need to win a leadership race, and is probably now starting to move towards speaking to the general population. And I think that that's what these kind of economic messages, and particularly directed at working class people, is part of that. And I mean, inflation and cost of living, affordability is absolutely top of everybody's mind. Any conversation I have with people these days, kind of across political party lines.
So why does he have this feel to himself, Sally?
Well, that I couldn't tell you, to be honest. I mean, it's hard for governments to talk about affordability, because then, people are like, well, what are you doing about it? Right. But I definitely would like to see, I mean, I know here in Saskatchewan, the the Saskatchewan opposition has been really squarely on the affordability issue all summer long. The NDP federally is obviously talking about it, but it's mixed in with a lot of different messages. And I think kind of that more square focus on it would benefit the opposition.
Scott, his stuff's pretty good, isn't it? Like, I mean, I think there was some weirdness about the Trudeau breakfast thing, but that marginal effective tax rate video that Sally's talking about, I actually for a few minutes felt like I was learning something, and then I had to stop myself and say, holy fuck, I gotta go check this out from a different source. It's good, right?
Yeah, and that's what, it's potent. It's still poisonous, but it's potent, and that's why it needs a response. It needs a counterpunch, and it needs it to be effective, because if you look carefully at what he's doing, I think, two important things that people have to take notice of. I mean, first of all, he is, as you say, strategically shifting his message away from things that are 80-20 debates, such as against him, like vaccine mandates and, World Economic Forum, all this sort of shit, like Sally's mentioning, toward issues that are 80-20 in favor, which is that overwhelmingly that you ought to be worried, and you are worried, and I get that worry with respect to cost of living and the pressures that it's placing on you day in, day out in 100 different ways, whether it's groceries, whether it's mortgage payments, and so on and so forth. And so that's the first thing. It's a smart strategic shift for him, because it's one that moves him into a position where he can compete more effectively for the next general election, and it's potent. The second thing that makes it smart is that it's a TED Talk, right? It's a Fred talk, right? It's pitched at the common person, and he purports to, in plain language and no bullshit, not unlike the mayor that we just heard, right? Where she's just talking like straight, like, I'm going to call somebody, if someone's a fuckwad, I'm going to call him a fuckwad. And he's trying to employ that same voice in some respects, not cursing, but he's trying to employ the same voice as, I'm going to cut the shit here and I'm just going to tell you how it is. You know that everything on this plate here at breakfast costs you more. And you know that hurts you, and the government doesn't. Now, what's pernicious about it is that the supposed content of this TED Talk, the way in which he weaves together the connection between government policies and the problem, is utterly false. Like, it is a bullshit construction. But
I had, like, just for example, Kevin Carmichael, the editor of the Financial Post, was on the Herle Burley last week, and I asked him directly, what is the impact of federal spending on inflation? Negligible. And if you remove the CERB, zero.
Right. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be disciplined and all those sorts of things. But the attribution of it, I'm not even sure, by the way, that specific element is all that smart for him. I think what causes people to resonate, to be resonant with him, is that him saying, I get the problem. I don't know that he needs to attach it to Justin Trudeau, because I think by virtue of incumbency, you do own it. But in any event, he's chosen to do that. And I just think that, as you say, David, you can challenge him on, and I know you've been pounding this drum, you can challenge him on the basis of, well, the spending you're talking about is actually the spending that kept families whole and kept our economy from crashing like a hot rod car into a wall. So you were against that? Because I don't recall you saying you were against that. You kind of chip and bitch and moan about it on the sides, but you actually don't oppose. So you can go with that. But fundamentally, I think you have to look at the strategic shift on message focus that he's made, and the manner in which he's communicating, and the manner in which he dresses up his communication as, I'm going to help you understand what's going on here without being patronizing, in a way that makes you nod your head as opposed to shake your head. Because Chrystia Freeland makes people shake their head. When she says, listen, my childcare plan is the answer to your cost of living crisis, people shake their head. When he says this fucking egg costs more than it did 3 weeks ago, people nod their head. That has to be challenged. And it has to be challenged directly, has to be challenged with a certain voice, has to be challenged without being patronizing. And it has to be challenged yesterday. And I've been saying this for months, but I just don't understand why the government doesn't think that they need to go with this. And I see some people going, you know what, this tone, this bullshit, and I agree, the empty chair bullshit is an affectation that's too cute by half. But I see people saying, well, this stuff's going to wear out on people fast. That this tone. And no, like Don't
There's a
bet
level of,
that it won't work.
yeah.
Bet that it will work and do something about it.
There's a level
Go ahead,
of
Sally.
hubris here, I think, with the liberals. I like you guys have been shocked that, I mean, it's been clear to, I think, myself and and obviously, you never count your chickens before they're hatched, but that, Poilievre is going to be the leader of the Conservative Party, and that there seems to be no resources or anything going into defining him now. And even that, when he's talking about kind of the clawbacks and everything like that, being able to kind of look at your record, and your own kind of record as a conservative and things that you voted for and things that you've kind of been against in terms of affordability and supporting people like that. There's an absolutely a wealth of information out there that can be used. And I'm not seeing anything, like I said, those resources being put to defining him. And I feel like it's, once he wins that leadership, you're going to be behind the eight ball. You're already going to be a little too fucking late.
Yeah, the Trudeau people, I don't think, liked that approach somehow, because they didn't do it to Scheer, they didn't do it to O'Toole, and they're not doing it so far to Poilievre, which sort of broke a long-term pattern, because we did it to Harper, and then Harper did it to every Liberal leader. Maybe they think that the Just Not Ready campaign proved that those preconditioning methods are ineffective. I don't know.
I think that's a really interesting point, David, because I have to assume, I mean, it's not like people are stupid, right? These guys have won elections. These guys have a point of view. These guys have had success. They're professionals. They do it all day, every day. So it's not like they just wandered in off the street and they're making dumb mistakes that only we can spot. I mean, they have a point of view, and their point of view, obviously, is that this either isn't merited at this time, will be more effective later, or isn't the right way to go about it. So I'm puzzled by that. I'd love to have a conversation where somebody would explain to me what the logic is between doing nothing in response to it. But the other element that I think is really important is this Fred Talk versus TED Talk idea, right? Like, I just think that, like,
can I ask you to incorporate a certain thing into your point, which is, in a world in which TikTok has reduced people's attention spans to 10 seconds or less, how are these 6-7 minute videos working?
Well, I think they work because they counter that. I think that actually helps Poilievre, because he's, by virtue of medium, he's saying, I'm unafraid to be unconventional, not just in terms of what I'm saying, but how I'm saying it. And I'm happy to. And I think that it, in a weird way, it permits him to claim a little bit of a crown of gravitas and say, I'm going to take 6 minutes and walk through this. And it is going to be my version of a TED Talk. And so I think that works for him. I don't know if it captures every Canadian, but I think there's a strategic decision there that makes sense. And it says, even as I say stuff that's patently false and rubbish, I'm a serious candidate. Even as I pretend there's a guy having breakfast with me who's not there, there's a seriousness to the fact that I will speak extemporaneously and in some analytical manner about a subject for 6 minutes. And I guess where I was going is, I just hope, like, the government can tell me that it doesn't think it's right to do it, and I will disagree with them. But when it does whatever it does, when Freeland does pop up to speak about the economy, and Trudeau even more, like, it needs to be more Fred Talk and less TED Talk. Like, they are so assuming in their tone that, well, we know how to do this, and we know that, you will agree with us that a bunch of these things are wrong, and therefore we will not be wrong. And there's just an assumptive tone that they really have to drop. So say more and say it better. So back when COVID first appeared and the economy suddenly became a wilderness of uncertainty, a lot of companies staggered and slashed spending. Our sponsor, CN, did not. I've talked about this here before. During the long months of lockdowns and paralysis, CN did not miss a single day of work. Just about everything at some point moves by train, and had the railway stopped moving cargo, the consequences would have been catastrophic. But a railway is also a high-maintenance thing. Everything is connected to everything else. Tracks need replacing. So do railroad ties. New tracks must be built. Next generations of safety technology arrive.
Bridges, often located deep in the Canadian wilderness, need to be repaired and maintained. Road crossings must be kept in apple pie order for the sake of safety. There's a constant need to add new, high-efficiency rail cars in order to expand capacity. In sum, during the first 2 years of the pandemic, CN spent $5.8 billion on maintenance and improvements. Add in the 2 previous years and the figure is $13 billion. 2022 will be no different. CN, in fact, leads the other big Class 1 North American railways, consistently plowing a greater percentage of its revenues back into its fleet and infrastructure. This year, CN intends to replace 425,000 railway ties in the 4 western provinces and 191 miles of rail. It will rebuild 130 road crossings. In some areas, it will upgrade track to allow for faster trains. It will install more sidings where trains can allow other trains to pass. A 2-mile tunnel near Vancouver has a new upgraded ventilation system, allowing more trains to pass through. There are complex plans to alleviate traffic bottlenecks going into the ports of Vancouver and Prince Rupert. These are colossal efforts, and of course the entire point is to ensure cargo is moved safely and on time. In just a few weeks, Western farmers will be shipping this year's grain crop to markets in Canada and beyond. Tens of millions of tons. CN will be ready. Sally, what do you think about this? My whole career in politics, as the world migrated from television advertising to digital advertising, has been how do I crunch my message down into tighter and tighter, shorter and shorter, till you almost get down to memes. What do you think about this 6-minute video strategy?
It's fascinating to me. And you said kind of with TikTok and down to 10 seconds. I watched TikTok a lot. And actually, since they started, you're getting now longer. You have some that are kind of 2 to 3 minutes long or whatever. And so, if maybe it's a pendulum swinging of you get down to something so short and then people crave something that actually has some substance. I think we're talking about the length of it is maybe different than the content. And what I find fascinating is he's got this way of speaking, and I don't know if I'd call it stilted or whatever, but I'd almost, because there's certain things that you get so advanced in terms of communication, I almost wonder if he's, done some learning and kind of linguistic programming, because it's very, very definite.
Anglo-Saxon words.
It's very definite in the way he delivers the message. And, 6 minutes is still not that long, right? I know you talk about people's attention spans, but if you are able to have that kind of delivery and content that grips people, then that works. And I mean, we've seen recently kind of some articles and commentaries saying that, kind of there's millennial and Gen Z, particularly, men, being driven to this campaign or being attracted to that campaign. I think we can talk about the length. I think he could deliver something in a minute. I think he could deliver it in 10, but I think it's more about the content than the length.
By the way, this movement also wants and craves verification and vindication. Right, if in a faux intellectual sense, as anti-elite as all the language and accusations are, right? There's nothing that this crowd likes more than Jordan Peterson, who writes a whole book, right? And therefore they can sort of point to it and say, well, there, we have a prophet, right? And I also think there's an element, the certainty with which Poilievre speaks, right? The length at which he speaks, the manner which is, I'm going to provide this almost like a seminar with a plain language pitch, but in the context of a learned lecture, it hits a bullseye with that crowd, because they want to be able to say, see, I'm not just an unthinking idiot, right? Like there's an intellectual rigor to what we're doing. They may not say it that way, but that's what they respond to. And I think that he's really capturing that. And he's saying, I am, I am serious. I have weight. I have girth here. And somebody's got to take it on.
Are you talking to me?
But someone's
They
got to say, hey, they don't print bills. No one's standing in the basement of the Bank of Canada just peeling the fucking, like a big guy with a cigar going, all right, keep the presses running. And $20 bills are flying off, right? So fucking bust that myth. Like, go at them and just go, this is a crock of shit. But
all right, speaking of printing money, our clipping of the week comes to us via the Regina Leader Post. How appropriate with Sally on the show, but it's just serendipity. Jeremy Symes of the Regina Leader Post reported yesterday, and I will quickly produce highlights of this. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe announced Monday the government will be providing $500 tax credit checks to each resident aged 18 and older in the province as people continue to grapple with high costs. In a social media post, Moe said the provincial government has entered a surplus position, adding that the government is able to provide the credit because the economy, largely the resource sector, has managed to fare well despite international uncertainty. You own the resources, and you should benefit when those resource prices are high, Moe said in a video message. NDP finance critic Trent Wotherspoon said in a statement Monday, the province should have offered this relief months ago. He said the government has increased utility rates, expanded the PST, and added new fees. Wotherspoon stated the government should scrap the expanded PST and utility hike. Sally, this is obviously good politics, and the NDP response shows that it is good politics.
Yeah. Who doesn't like getting $500, right? Like that's, I go back to kind of, Ralph Bucks, which, was kind of, introduced towards his end days. Listen, what it is, there's a by-election coming up, right? I would imagine that they call it this week.
Oh, fuck, they wouldn't do this to win a by-election, would they? It's a lot of money to win a by-election.
It's a lot of money, but I mean, this is where, Trent Wotherspoon saying that they could have done this months ago.
Right.
But the timing is pretty suspect. Right.
Sure.
It's Saskatoon-Meewasin. It's the former leader of the NDP, Ryan Miley's riding, which he only won by a couple hundred votes last time around. It would be a pickup that the Sask party would love to have. Carla Beck, who's the new leader, that'll be a real kind of test for her under the new leadership. Got a great candidate there. But so, yeah, the by-election, BUY election, as it is now, right? The timing is tremendously suspect. And it is right that they have raised utility rates. They put PST on riders' tickets, for fuck's sake, right? Like, so it's the type of thing of like, you rob $10 out of somebody's pocket and give them back $5, should they say thank you to you, right? But listen, they've had a bad summer. Usually the summer should be a good time for the government, and it has not been for the Sask party. They had the finance minister took an $8,000 flight North Battleford, which for those listening is about a 4-hour drive. She went up there $8,000 for a lunch, which, when we're talking about affordability, that's like a $16 orange juice. That's one that no reasonable person thinks should happen. A couple other things. They've got a scandal with some abuse in a school in Saskatoon, a religious school. They've, $8 million to a consulting firm in the United States for kind of 5 phone calls and a few meetings. So they've like that, not
to mention rural hospitals.
Not to mention rural hospitals, right? Like, right. So, usually the summer for the government, you don't have the opposition kicking you in the house every day. Usually the summer is time for government to be out kind of, cutting ribbons and on the barbecue circuit. They've had a real shit summer.
Which means they're down to what? Close to 50%?
Yeah. But I understand, it's good politics. Obviously I understand why you're doing it. I can bitch and moan and all the things I've said are true. But if I was in government, I'd probably do the same thing. So.
Yeah. Scott, the feds are likely to do something like this. Does it matter when you do it? Is there a time when it's too late to do it? Looks like you missed it and didn't understand.
Probably. And, and there's also, if you do it late, and you do it in spite of all the things that you've said that make it sound like it's a bad idea until you concede that it's a necessary thing, then that's going to harm you as well. I'm not convinced the government will. I used to be. I probably sat here maybe 2 months ago saying, look, they'd better do something because they're going to have to do something inevitably.
I saw a clip from Randy Boisseau a week or so ago where he kind of implied they're going to get some money out the door.
I did see that also. So we'll have to see what they actually mean by that. I really worry that they think this is cheap politics and they won't go to it, and they think that it will undermine a bunch of things that they think they're achieving. Like nope, we've now gotten the gospel on fiscal discipline, and we're not going to add to the stream. We're only going to empty the stream of fiscal expenditures, and so I don't know, but I know this. The most important thing about the clipping that you underscored is the NDP response. The most important thing
should have been earlier and more.
Right. And it tells us there's an orthodoxy on this. So if the federal government doesn't want to do this, and if it doesn't want to suffer the slings and arrows of coming to it late and obviously in contradiction to everything they've said prior to that, then they have to come up with an alternative. And I continue to think they should look at the places where they cost people money and just go, what are the fees that we charge for passports, for other services, and just say, you know what, all those things on interest payments with respect to student loans, like all of that, and just go, we're doing a holiday. We're doing, like, take action and say, because right now, childcare is the one talking point they have about how they're going to provide financial relief to people. And it is a risible talking point. And so they need to be able to give
it does harm something. It does harm to the childcare program to
it certainly does.
To try to put it into that box.
They need a reset on this whole approach and dialogue and discussion and policy, and they're not there. And
but Sally's right. If you're not going to do anything, the government has no entree into the conversation. Because if you're not going to do anything, all your talk is just, as they say, all assistance short of actual help.
We talked about this last week, though.
It's like I feel your pain, right?
Yeah.
What else can you say?
I really think there's a much bigger danger here, right? Just from a political standpoint, for people like me and David, who vote Liberal, Sally, right? And I think the bigger danger is I think the government thinks its plan is working and people don't know it yet, and I think therefore they've got this kind of contented. Look, it's all breaking our way. The housing market's starting to correct. We're starting to see inflation is now abating slightly. We're going to see the gas prices have come down. And all of those things, of course, are speculative. They're all transitory. They all assume that even if they will remain in place, which I don't think they will, particularly gas prices, that the government will get credit for any of that. But I think there's a real danger that the government actually thinks its plan is working, and therefore doing nothing for a while longer will just sweeten the payoff when people see that they were right all along and things are better in January. And
there's a forecast today.
Scares the shit out of me.
There's a forecast today of 18% inflation in the UK next year.
Jesus.
If that's true, it doesn't feel like it's going to be going down here.
Yeah. I just like on a kind of slightly different note, but to Scott's point about them just thinking things are working. I just and I'm not in Ottawa. I'm out out here in the West. I've just found the Liberal government really quiet this summer for all the things kind of going on. You know what I mean? I've just not really been and I'm obviously more than a casual observer of politics, but they just don't seem.
No, the highest profile person's been Omar Al Gabra.
I just don't I haven't felt them or seen them present. And obviously, I mean, here we are in Saskatchewan since Ralph lost his seat. We don't have any Liberal representation at all. But I just really haven't heard them kind of over the course of the summer. And I think that's a danger as well.
I got to think that they think that if they talk about cost of living, they own it, and that they'll only make it worse.
So something really weird that we have to take seriously is that the person who appears likely to be the next premier of Alberta relatively quickly, Danielle Smith, has proposed that her first act as premier, and she's running and winning on this platform, will be something called the Alberta Sovereignty Act. The Alberta Sovereignty Act, among other things, would state that federal laws are not valid in Alberta or enforceable unless the provincial government agrees with them. The federal government, Alberta, will appoint the judges that sit on federal courts from Alberta, and the Alberta government will collect all taxes and remit to the federal government what it thinks is fair. which does not include costs for things like equalization or transfers. So, I mean, this is a premier we're talking about, can introduce a bill in the legislature to do this. How should the federal government react to this?
I mean, first of all, Danielle Smith certainly seems to be the front runner. She's got momentum, but it's really hard to handicap that race because of the voting, the down ballot, the number of people in the race. So my first caution is that, it seems likely. So, but that just, if we are assuming she's the leader, then that is still a pretty big assumption.
Okay.
At this time. Now, I mean, they have doubled the membership just about, or a little bit over, from 60,000 to I think 123,000, the UCP membership since Kenny had got the 51%. And that definitely probably speaks more to Danielle Smith and Brian Jean signing up members than Travis Taves or Rebecca Schultz. But all that being said, I mean, it's interesting. And, until this is actually written and you see what's been proposed, and she had this, the article in the National Post about looking at, and the way it's being sold kind of to the people of Alberta and to members and stuff is like, we just want what Quebec has, right? Simple as that, which is a pretty targeted and a message that resonates in Alberta. I'll be interested to see, because, it's the same with Polyev. We talked about kind of pivoting or whatever. You argue things to win a leadership race. When this would actually be written and proposed, would it be watered down? So it's really hard to kind of talk about how the federal government reacts until things come to fruition. I think what's going to be interesting, you've got the government on one side. I think, again, if we're also assuming Pierre Poilievre is going to win the Conservative leadership race, that what does he do with that coming forward? Does he, if he's running to be Prime Minister of Canada, say, okay, we're going to let Alberta just control everything itself? That puts him in a really awkward position. So I know this is not a super helpful in terms of giving advice to the government on how they would deal with it, but
it's a dodge. It's a dodge.
Well,
it's a dodge because the logical thing to do, Scott, is disallowance. But it's a Trudeau and it's Alberta.
Yeah. Well, as the joke goes about you and me, David, I'd rather fight than fuck. So I would fight. And I would make it an unqualified commitment. I think there's a bunch of things you have to do. I think that first of all, I agree with a lot of what Sally said. I agree with everything Sally said. But the most important thing is that I think there may be an instinct on the part of the federal government to let Rachel Notley fight the fight. I think that they might say, well, let's just back off here. We don't want to throw logs on this fire. We'll brief people off the record, national media, even provincial media. We'll brief stakeholders and say, this is the prudent and wise course. We don't want to add fire to this cause. We'll let Rachel Notley fight the fight, and she'll pick the holes in it. And then that will be an Alberta first argument that comes from Albertans first. And I think that's largely driven by its anxiety about the Quebec comparison and where that goes. And they've been so gloves off on Quebec and the go with the autonomy agenda. I have a different view, which many people will hate and think is imprudent and unwise. But my view is you take on this debate and you elevate this debate. And it's an opportunity to say, hang on, right? There are some fundamental things here. Like, are we a country or are we not? Is there a basic sense of community and collective purpose where we all pay in and then we all get stuff? And don't get into an argument about what's the fair share for Alberta and all that stuff. Don't get mixed into those weeds. Don't get drawn into that level of detail. Just elevate it to, this is a matter of fundamental fairness. We are stronger together than we are apart. We've watched Brexit. We know what the bullshit promises of we'll be better off without others, how that's resulted, right? So that is that's a barrel of monkeys that they're selling. And I would elevate it around those issues. I would make it about principles of fairness, coming together. I would punch holes on some of the things that are most obviously kooky, the policing stuff. I would scare the shit out of people because they ought to be scared shitless, frankly, about what it means in terms of CPP, their federal pensions, all that stuff. Like, and just, I would go at it and I would make the case for, at some point, if the prime minister doesn't make the case for Canada, then who in hell will make the case for Canada? And Confederation is still a good idea.
But to Sally's point, Andre Pratt did say that to me about Trudeau and Quebec.
I know. I want to add one more thing, though. I would take full advantage of this dialogue to make Pierre Poilievre as uncomfortable as possible. I would not say, now we need to hear from Pierre Poilievre as to what he thinks of it. Because Pierre Poilievre is a skilled enough politician and communicator that he will slip the punch. He will
assume what his position is and tie it to.
That's exactly it. I will go out and say, and Pierre Poilievre's full in support of this, and make him therefore deny that he's in support of it. Don't ask him what he thinks about it so he can provide some subtle dodge that he works around and says, well, the real issue here is that Alberta's been getting fucked and this federal government doesn't get it, blah, blah, blah. No, say he's for this, right? He is for taking away the CPP from everybody who lives in Alberta. He is for leaving communities unpoliced by the RCMP, and God only knows what would replace it. Right? Hammer on those things and say that's what Pierre Poilievre's position is, and make him say, no, it's not my position. Because then, no, it isn't his position, and he's put in opposition to Danielle Smith and to the same populist crowd that's cheering this bill of goods.
Sally, this is spilling over into Saskatchewan, isn't it?
A little bit. So you had the premier kind of do a sovereignty tour this summer, and it was a closed door meetings, which I found interesting. And it was something that they kind of tried to do a little quietly. In the last kind of speech from the throne, there was a mention that this is something they might do. But normally when the government launches a tour of some sort, there is a press release or something, but there wasn't that. So it was a series of meetings they did about kind of, Saskatchewan's place in Canada. Again, I come from Newfoundland. Getting into a fight with the feds is always something that kind of works well in the province. But it kind of came up a little bit in the news, and then it died down. And I'm wondering what kind of polling they're seeing around that. I don't know that it works in Saskatchewan quite as well as it works in Alberta.
I'll tell you what scares me, Sally. I'll tell you what scares me is that I have in my life seen a lot of Alberta and Saskatchewan premiers I disagreed with in various things. And many of them were very elbows up with the federal government, which I don't necessarily have a problem with. But I have never seen two people as premiers of those provinces, and if Danielle Smith wins and Scott Moe, that don't believe in Canada, that are actually opponents of the project.
Yeah, I mean, and it's, we're kind of moving forward to this. And I think you look at this in the context of, the Freedom Trucker Convoy. You look at it in the context of this kind of QAnon. There's a broader thing going on, and not just in Canada, but across North America and frankly in the Western world to begin with. I don't know how you kind of put that tube back in the toothpaste. That toothpaste back in the tube.
Don't make things harder than they actually are.
Yeah. But certainly Justin Trudeau provides an excellent foil for these premiers. With not a lot of liberal representation on the prairies, there's not really that many people on the ground who can kind of counteract that narrative and make the argument really for Canada. And again, kind of feeling like the Liberals being pretty quiet, out west. I hope that gives, frankly, the NDP a bit of an opportunity to build in the prairie provinces a little bit more. But it feels like the Liberals are kind of ceding that space.
Scott, I've been critical of the feds for Trudeau for not being more vocal on things, but on this particular thing, I think Sally will back me up on this, but I don't want to speak for her, so she can contradict me if she wants. The hatred toward Justin Trudeau in the prairies is so blindly explosive that it is impossible to have a rational conversation about substance with people involving the federal government. They won't people can't engage in it because they can't get past their hatred of him. I mean, they've got to find another spokesperson, I think, for this Western thing.
I don't agree.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. They don't have one right now, right? Like they really, really don't. But you're absolutely right. The hatred for Trudeau is pathological here. I obviously, as a New Democrat, am not the hugest fan as the Liberal government, and I hate putting myself in a position where I feel like I'm defending them. But yeah, there is no spokesperson. There's nobody talking to those kind of prairie provinces, and so this is just kind of being allowed to go unchecked. And you do get that again, the sense of Western alienation. It's not something that could or that should be dismissed. It's something that's real. It's something that's been there for a long time. And, similar with kind of separatism in Quebec, it's something that a sentiment that rises and falls over the years, depending on what's going on both provincially in the federal scene and in the world scene as well. Just going back to kind of the piece with Rachel Notley too, I mean, I don't think that if we're going into a provincial election, I don't know that the Alberta Sovereignty Act is going to be the thing that both leaders want to hang their hat on. I think it resonates kind of in terms of a leadership race. I don't think it's the thing that Danielle Smith wants to be running on. And I don't think it's the thing that Rachel Notley wants to spend all her time talking about either.
All right. Scott, what were you going to say?
Well,
you're going to make it the law.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, if you say, well, my policy is to build the Death Star, then you can't say, but now I'd like to talk about how we're going to deal with the Outer Rim. No, the Death Star is actually your policy. Let's talk about the Death Star. So she wants Sovereignty Act, that it's going to be the thing if she becomes premier. She introduces it first, then it's going to become the law, and then the die is cast. What I was going to say to you guys is, does there need to be a working spokesperson that can do the day-to-day lifting and the block and tackle? For sure. But fundamentally, and I don't want to be glib. Like, I'm not certainly just coming. Like, I recognize the professional perils in all of this, right? About feeding the fuel. And I recognize that Trudeau himself is a symbol and a brand that gets in the way of dialogue and all that sort of stuff. But I think by the same token, right? There's no getting around it. Right. He has the right honorable in front of his name. He is the Prime Minister of Canada. And fundamentally, this argument can't be lowered to others and a discussion about what a fair share distribution is. It must be elevated to the idea and the project of Confederation. And are we just going to walk away from it? Are we going to divide ourselves into smaller and smaller portions and say, well, you know what? It's not just about the province of Alberta. It's also about, the parcel of Calgary versus the parcel of Edmonton. I think someone has got to, and Trudeau is particularly well positioned to say, we have to establish certain fundamentals here and commitment to the project that is Canada. A notion that we are stronger as a federation than not as a federation. Those are fundamental things. And what you're doing is pulling on the thread that tears the sleeve off of Canada. And I'm not going to stand for it. I just think he has to communicate it.
I agree with that, Scott. I actually really agree with that. But I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I do think back to the fact that Pierre Trudeau knew that he had no connection to the West and knew that and didn't like the Western premiers, and they didn't like him. So he designated John Turner to do that job. And it was part of Turner's job to be in the West and to speak to the West and to not just meet with the governments, but also talk to the citizens. It was considered more acceptable face of federalism in Western Canada. I mean, I think that Trudeau should find somebody like that and put that in their job description. And it isn't Christia, by the way.
And no, it isn't. And you got to give them something to say, by the way. Don't send them out there, right? Don't send them out there to fight a martyr's death, to wage a martyr's death. You got to give them some content. You got to, and then you worry about rewarding the rebels and all that kind of stuff. But I think, I agree with that, a working spokesperson. But ultimately, this thing is going to come down to whether or not you frame it as a matter of, are we in this thing together or not? And that's got to come from the Prime Minister.
Hey, it's time for our Hey Yous. Where's Gordon Pinsett?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
There he is. All right. Who's going to start off? Sally, you got a Hey You?
I do have a hey you, and I apologize to my NDP friends, but my hey you today is to Benita Zarrillo, who's an NDP member of Parliament in BC, who a couple of days ago mused on Twitter about whether we still needed ice rinks in Canada given the climate impact. And it's one of those things where, I first saw it with Brian Jean using it, saying like, hey, Rachel Notley, this is what New Democrats think, right? And ended up as a headline in the Toronto Sun. NDP MP wonders if we still need indoor ice rinks given climate impact. And she deleted it after a while, but kind of doubled down a little bit. Saying I'm not just talking about ice hockey here. I'm like, okay, so you mean figure skating and curling and everything else that we love in Canada? Great, awesome. And it's just it's just one of the silliest musings, talk about like, hey, maybe we can get rinks to net zero. You know what I mean? There's different, the United States is studying kind of various different environmental impacts, but just the phrasing and, like I said, the kind of general kind of offhanded glib nature of the tweet was, I was going like, geez, why can't we have nice things as New Democrats, man? That's a rough one. And it's just one of those natural things. Like I said, deleted. It's kind of a bit of a port in the storm, but I guess, hey, you, Benita, have a thought before you tweet again. Hey,
Jesus, when I hear something like that, and I think I look at the people that are in politics these days, I think of Hunter S. Thompson's line, when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. Scott,
I'm going to cheat this week. I got two. A quick one off the top. David, I hey you to your godson. It's my second son, Will's 20th
Absolutely,
birthday.
Will. Big bear hug, brother. Love you.
Go get it. Working as a bartender for the summer. God, his dad couldn't be happier. So happy birthday to my boy. But my real hey you goes out to Pierre Poilievre, and I almost harkens to the first portion of what we were talking about with Maritarian. Like in the sea of economic videos and all that kind of stuff, I just want to take us back 4 or 5 days to this Jeremy McKenzie issue. Where there's a photograph that surfaces of Pierre Poilievre shaking hands with Jeremy McKenzie, the leader of this Diagolon or whatever the hell they call themselves, sort of extremist group. Guy's got 13 charges against him in Nova Scotia, firearm-related charges. Counterterrorism says that he's trying to plot murders, threatening, harassing, intimidating the Nova Scotia chief medical officer. I know. We all know, all three of us know, that politicians shake hands with 1 billion people and you can't be responsible for that. And it turns out, this person turns out to be bad. That's not what I put on him. But his statement, Pierre Poilievre's statement in response to this, where he makes no reference and no effort to distance himself from Jeremy McKenzie in any way at all specific, simply says, hey, it's bullshit. I take my photo with people all the time. Fair enough. I grant you that. Then the second thing is, I reject racism of all kinds and extremism of all kinds. Doesn't make reference to Jeremy McKenzie. Does not make an effort to say, it may bother some people that have found their way into my coalition, but I want to be crystal clear. There's a principle here. I want nothing to do with this guy. This guy represents a violent manifestation of this argument, and I'm not for him. Does not do that. And then finally adds this cheeky, cheap jackwagon shot at the prime minister and says, just like I'm not responsible for the many quote unquote racist outbursts from Justin Trudeau. That's horseshit, man. That is crap. And if you think that you're going to actually, and atypically for this campaign, which has been so buttered to the edge, if you think that people think that Justin Trudeau is in any way a racist, you are believing your own bullshit. And it was cheap, and it was diminishing, and it was transparent. And for the people that were bothered to pay attention, they saw it for what it is, and they see you for what you are. That is shit. And I just think you should be called out on it, and you should be reminded of it, and you should be made to pay a consequence of it. You need to distance yourself from this guy and not try to pivot to Justin Trudeau with false crap.
Well, there you go. My hey you is essentially a corollary of yours because it also goes out to Pierre Poilievre on the same issue, but from a slightly different perspective. Poilievre, if you want power, you need a strategy that either wins you a majority of seats or you've run on a platform that allows an opposition party to support you if you've won a plurality of seats. Those are the only two ways you're going to get power. The footsie with the leadership of the angry fringe is going to make either of those things impossible. You don't need it to win the leadership, and it will cost you the general. Hey, you, Pierre Poilievre. All right, folks, I would like to thank Sally for being here this week. Thank you so much. Thanks, Scott, for being here. The mayor of Peterborough, Diane Therrien, what a delight it was to meet her.
She was awesome.
Outstanding. Fuckwadding awesome.
I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail, for putting this show on the air and making it available to people. And I'd like to thank everybody who watched or listened today. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week with more Curse of Politics. Take care.
Thanks all.